Okay. So thank you first on Tanya and June for organizing this amazing event and bringing together this group. Very important. Thank you. So in my talk, I'm going to examine one of the unintended effects that pursuing happiness can have on us. Now, happiness is, of course, one of the central aims that we have, maybe even the central purpose of our existence. The Dalai Lama has not read June's research yet. Maybe he would change his mind if he did. Evidence for the importance of this pursuit is, if anything, sort of increasing as of lately. So we just have to go into Amazon.com to see a great many books that are devoted to helping us understand happiness and helping us become happier. And this, of course, so people highly value happiness. And this might be quite rational and very reasonable because as we highly value happiness, we pursue happiness more and then we become ever happier. So this might be evidence of a very rational and beneficial assumption and value system that we have. But if we think about it for a moment, we might have some second thoughts about the simple relationship between valuing happiness and good outcomes for the self. And specifically, it might be that as we value happiness more, like with other values, we come to set higher standards for how much happiness we experience and in how many situations we experience happiness. And those higher standards, in turn, make it more likely that we're going to fall short of those standards. So it makes it more likely that we're going to experience disappointment or discontent. In general, that's not a problem, right? So I might be valuing being good at math more. I have higher standards for my math abilities, and I disappoint myself because my standards are higher, and then I'm going to work better at becoming good at math. But in the context of happiness, there's a really interesting intrinsic tension here between the value itself and the output of those higher standards. And we could call that a meta-emotion, where in fact the disappointment and emotional state is in direct conflict with the value itself. So we might in fact have a self-defeating situation here where the more we value happiness, the less likely we might become to obtain it. In other words, decreasing our chances of being happy. So if we want to test these relationships, we might think that context might play a really important role here. So are our context conducive to us being happy or not? And so an example might nicely illustrate that. So let's say you highly value happiness and you're at a birthday party that your friends are throwing for you. So this is a positive context. You have no reason not to be happy, and say you fall short of your very high standards for happiness. And in this case, we might expect that self-defeating effect of valuing happiness that I just talked about. Now, let's say you just got some bad news, a friend of yours had an accident. Now you're in a negative context and you have an external explanation for falling short of your high happiness values or standards. And so in this case, you might not experience the disappointment because you have an external explanation, and we might expect weaker effects of valuing happiness on your actual feelings. So put simply, we're expecting an interaction of people's happiness values and the context they are in. All right then, so are people who value happiness less happy? And to begin testing this, we devised a little questionnaire that simply asked people how important is happiness to you? And they would endorse 7 different items tapping into this construct. This here shows how people in general fall on the scale, and it's the people here on the right, so those who endorse really extremely valuing of happiness that we're interested in. And so in one study, we recruited a sample of women to begin testing whether valuing happiness might be associated with less happiness. Because we're interested in context, we recruited the women to have recently experienced a wide range of stressors, ranging from really mild ones, like a move across town, to very severe ones, like the death of a friend. And so I'll show you now first trait hedonic balance levels. So that's basically just how much positive over negative emotions the women in general experience. So high life stress first. And as you see, these are women who experienced recently lots of life stress. And so they're very unhappy overall, low levels of hedonic balance. And you also see that how much they generally value happiness doesn't matter. So the 2 bars are indistinguishable from one another. Now here are women whose lives had been going really pretty well in the past 18 months, and they don't value happiness very much. Appropriately, you see that they are quite happy, high levels of hedonic balance overall. And then these are the women now who highly value happiness. And paradoxically, even though their lives have been going pretty well on the whole over the past 18 months, they are almost as low in terms of their hedonic balance as their high stress counterparts. Now, we wanted to see whether this would extend beyond mood to perhaps symptoms of mood disorder. And so we looked at depression symptoms, and we see very similar patterns. So high life stress, high levels of depression, and it doesn't matter how much you value happiness. But at low levels of life stress, you see that paradoxical effect where women who value happiness more were also more depressed than those who value happiness less. Now, this suggests that people who highly value happiness are less happy and more depressed. But of course, this is just correlational. And so we next wanted to ask whether there's any evidence that valuing happiness might also cause people to be less happy. So in this study then, we experimentally manipulated the value that people placed on happiness. And we did this with a fake news report. So we told our participants happiness not only feels good, it also carries important benefits. The happier people feel, the more likely they're to be successful, healthy, and popular. And we went on a little bit like this. So basically, it's a happiness is really important manipulation, and it's a quite extreme endorsement of that happiness value. And then in the control group, we told our participants something exactly parallel, but it concerned judgments. And then we, again, are interested in the emotional context, and so we assign participants to either watch a sad film clip taken from the movie Return to Me, where a husband is shown who very suddenly loses his wife, versus the infamous Sarah Hughes happy film clip showing Sarah Hughes winning the gold medal in Olympic figure skating and celebrating very exuberantly, and people watch this and they become happy. So we have, again, we're manipulating the value of happiness, and we're manipulating the emotional context, and we're interested in an interaction between those 2 factors. And so I'll show you a summary score again of affect, so hedonic balance, positive over negative affect. In this case, how people felt while they were watching the film clip. And so these are the participants who saw the film clip about the husband whose wife died. And so appropriately, they're sad. Low levels of hedonic balance, and it didn't matter which experimental group they had been in. Now, these are the participants who had seen Sarah Hughes win the gold medal, and they're very happy overall. This is the control group. And now the valuing happiness group, who had read the fake newspaper article about the importance of happiness, felt less positive affect overall after the happy film clip. One question, of course, that's still unanswered is, why is this the case? In the beginning, I had suggested a model where this might have something to do with meta-emotions. So how do people feel about the feelings they have? And to begin looking at this question of mechanism, we had asked our participants how disappointed they were after watching the film clip. And very briefly, statistically, these feelings of disappointment actually mediated the experimental effect of valuing happiness on hedonic balance, suggesting some support for this initial model. Obviously, we don't think that there's any one or only one mechanism for this relationship, but meta-emotions might play some role in it. So, pursuing happiness can make people unhappy, and I want to emphasize the can from the title, because obviously pursuing happiness doesn't necessarily make us unhappy, right? And we shouldn't just wallow in our misery. Clearly, in the right degree, as June emphasized, in the right way and in the right circumstance, pursuing happiness is good for us. But what these data point to is some boundary condition on the pursuit of happiness, and that those are happy who have their minds fixed on some object other than their own happiness, at least sometimes. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention, my lab. Graduate students Brett Ford, who's actually here today, and Craig Anderson, my collaborator, Maya Tamir, and funding agencies. Thank you.